So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another battle that I was actually in, and this is another 4v4 that we actually hosted just before the last one that I posted up, and it has got a very similar sort of structure to it. So we've got a 4v4 on a sort of wide open map, although having said that, this map so much better than the grassy plains. Like, I think that this is it's a town on the BELFALAS coast. I can't remember the exact name, but I'm sure that I'll use it in the name of the video itself. But there's mountains, there's little farmsteads, there's encampments, there's cities, there's different portions that you can use, raised terrain, everything. It's just so much more interesting than flat featureless maps, and that's one of the main things that I really love about this new patch. The fact that there's so many more of this kind of map, so much more rather of this type of map that can be used. And it is going to be another good versus evil battle as well, and I have to say most of the factions, it actually makes sense for them to be around the BELFALAS region. It is still fairly accurate. I mean, Cardlan and Khand are the only ones that have to move a fairly long way, and even then they're not a million miles away. So to be honest with you, all the factions that are on display today, it makes a good amount of sense for them to be here. So Dol Amroth in particular are going to be trying to defend their heartland from the invading forces of evil. And we'll start off with my army, and I am playing as Cardlan. Now, I went for a much more defensive build than I usually like to go for. Like, Cardlan in particular are very good at absorbing pressure, and that's what I wanted to do here with a lot of my lower tier units, my pikes, my spears, and then backing them up with my morale buffing units and my crossbows. And it turned out to be a pretty good move, because I can use the terrain to my advantage. I can use some of the choke points here that these narrow walls offer me to try and bottle the enemy up a little bit. You can be aggressive with Cardlan, but I'm actually glad that I wasn't in this case, because my opponent across the way, who is going to be Rune, although having said that, this battle does descend into a true 4v4 in parts. Rune has brought a lot of tools where if I was being overtly aggressive and moving across the field very quickly, he would have had the tools to punish me immensely for that. And Cardlan, if they are caught out, of course, their low morale can really prove to be a problem. So I'm glad that I went for a little bit more of a conservative build here, and that I'm going to be trying to either panic the enemy into charging forward into me recklessly, or trying to wear them down a little bit. And one of the tools I can use to do that are my Greenway Garrison Archers, obviously the militia archers that Cardlan have at their disposal. And the Greenway units in general are a very useful tool for Cardlan to use, because of course they are generally very cheap. You can bring them in great numbers, and obviously this does help to pad out your army a little bit, but obviously low morale is certainly a problem for them, so you do need to support them properly. And then over here, guarding the main body of my army, I do have some Greenway Garrison Spearmen as well. I've got a couple of units of them just to guard either the front lines or the flanks where need be. Very good at absorbing arrow fire still, because they do actually have a very nice shield value, but they are pretty poor in melee, very low damage, and of course in addition to that, spear malices. I've gone for 3 units of Greenway Garrison Footmen. For most pikemen, you can only bring 2 of them. The fact that Cardlan can bring 3 of their basic tier pike does go to show that they do certainly have a bit of a focus around using their phalanx to its fullest potential. So I've gone for all 3 of them because they're relatively cheap, and they will offer me a way to hold back a superior infantry force for a long period of time. And I was expecting Rune to be bringing superior infantry, and also Harad, who are nearby, would also have infantry that would be stronger than my own in this case overall, so I'm just trying to be as efficient as I can. I also have a unit of Dunedain captains. This is not where my general is, but this is the armour upgrade for the Dunedain captains as well. So they've got their tabard, they've got their sort of half plate armour that they wear as well. I was planning to use these guys a little bit more aggressively if I needed to really sort of support my infantry line early on, because of course they can inspire nearby men, but also they're the one genuine damage dealer that I have in my infantry corps, really. Other than that, my crossbows are actually my most damaging melee unit. I also have a catapult, and this was the thing that I was using to try and panic the enemy into either coming towards me or just to bombard them from range and peel away some of their numbers for a little bit. You would be surprised at how much a catapult can cause an enemy to panic, and that's what I was going for here, especially on a map like this, because I knew it wasn't a map like the grassy plain where a unit of artillery could be more easily countered. So I was trying to use the terrain to my advantage to maybe harry the enemy into moving forwards a little bit more quickly. I went for both units of Minhariath sharpshooters, so of course another one of my genuine damage dealers is going to be my crossbows. Crossbows are very good, of course, at dealing damage very quickly. They're also macemen in melee, so they actually double as being, overall my strongest unit of line infantry that I brought here, because I don't have any of the other Minhariath units. I've gone for a very numbers-focused approach here. But, yeah, I mean, I have brought all 3 crossbows, to be fair. In the background you can see the halberds poking above the heads of the Minotaur Roman gatekeepers, and usually I wouldn't actually advise bringing 3 units of crossbows. I would usually advise bringing 2 and then sort of dipping into other things, because a lot of my success in this battle is going to be determined on my crossbows, and I'm not a huge fan of placing all my eggs into one basket unless it's in a rush or something like that, whereas if I'm being a little bit more conservative like this, I tend to like spreading my strength out a little bit to make sure that if one aspect of my army isn't shut down, I don't collapse. But here I felt like because my ally was so close, I could use my sharpshooters to not only support my line but also his, so I felt like going for 3 units of crossbows was the thing to do. Couple of units of more Greenway garrison footmen and spearmen back here. I've also gone for the Wardens of Tyr and Gorthad, so this is Cardland's higher tier pike, of course, which means they can technically field 4 pikemen, which is certainly one of, if not the most amount of pikes a single faction can field, which is significant in its own way. But of course the Wardens of Tyr and Gorthad also act as a morale battery because they inspire nearby units around them. Very, very important, of course, because of Cardland's low morale, and if need be, they will be on the front line, being the anchor to what I do. But I do need to be careful because they're very likely to be focused down by runic projectiles as well, especially the armor-piercing ones. Single unit of Minhadiath archers, because I had enough money left over at the end to bring another unit of archers, and just in case my militia tier archers ran out of ammunition, I would have another unit that I could bring forward, also a better unit as well, to continue to put the pressure on Rune. And then finally, my cavalry force. I've got a couple of units of the mercenary cavalrymen, which of course are very basic sword cavalry. They've got a slightly changed unit model as well. Mercenary infantry are now macemen, but the mercenary cavalry still wield their swords. Overall, as Merc cavalry, of course, they are very basic, and Rune's cavalry is certainly stronger than Cardland's overall, at least more diverse. Cardland do have some potent cavalry units, to be sure, but Rune certainly have a wider range that they can draw from. The knights in particular are very nice. And the mercenary cavalry I was just having over here to make sure that cavalry couldn't just sweep around into my backlines and start hammering and anviling my troops, because if that happened I'd be in real trouble. So using the mercenary cavalry to pin enemy cav in place that gets too aggressive and then showering them with crossbow bolts was the plan. And then finally, the other damage dealers that I have in my army are my 2 units of lancers. So first the Tharbad Riders, which of course have got that lethal charge bonus. They are one of those units which has a charge bonus which is far above and beyond the cost of it, but also the stats of the Tharbad Riders beyond its charge are not fantastic, and also they do still suffer from that low morale, and of course it's much more difficult for the Tharbad Riders to be inspired when they're charging in and out of the enemy lines. It's much less likely than an inspiration unit is going to be nearby them. And then my General's Bodyguard, the very, very nice looking, I have to say, Royal Court of House Thorondor. They now have their own look, which looks absolutely fantastic. Multiple HP Lancers, so very much like the Royal Court of House Armlaith or the Mithrandir's retinue from Gondor. They are multiple HP Lancers, or even the Dragon's Wrath Warlords from Rune. So they're not knights. They will not dominate fights with other cavalry in melee, but they do have lethal charges, and they are very tough to bring down. Like, they may not have a bonus against cavalry, but still, they will manage to keep themselves alive through some pretty sticky situations better than most. And that's where my general is going to be. Moving on to my first ally, I'll try and pick up the pace. I don't want 20-minute intros if I'm honest, but there's a lot to talk about. It's a new patch. We have Steelcan, who's going to be playing as Gondor. Of course, in the last battle, he had a pretty rough time being double-teamed when he was Mordor and rushing forward into the jaws of Erebor and Imladris, but today he's going to be playing as Gondor. So this was the battle actually before that, and Harada across the way, which is an interesting matchup because Harada have got all the armor-piercing they could possibly need to make life very difficult for Gondor, but on the other hand, Harad's low armour can be a real problem for them because Gondor have got all the tools they need to deal with that. A lot of nice archers that they can bring to the field, as well as a lot of very nasty elite infantry, and even their line infantry is very, very good at holding the line. So we'll see how this goes. He's got some Pinneth Gelin cavalry, so some good lancers. Again, their skill can keep them alive for a surprising amount of time in melee. They don't have the armour upgrade here, but again, it's very much something you want to keep out of melee with other cavalry, but to be fair, Harad don't have a huge array of melee cavalry anyway, so he should actually be fine with regards to that. He's another player, I think, that doesn't realise that Gondor have got 2 levels of armour upgrades, because I think on everything I can see, he's only got the first level. He's got some Gondor archers here at the front, in addition to some Gondor militia archers, so he's definitely going for the sort of long-term skirmish approach, which is definitely a good idea, I think, against Harad with their low armour, because Gondor are going to be able to wear down Harad at range pretty easily, honestly, especially now that the lower tier archers have been tuned down a little bit with regards to how efficient they can really be. And he's actually gone for a couple of units of marksmen of Caer Andros as well, so that's 6 units of archers. So Harad are going to have to be pretty careful on the advance, or just sitting back here, because Gondor have got all the skirmish power they need, and the marksmen of Caer Andros are also pretty damn good in melee when they pull out their longswords. We have some Gondor spearmen on the flanks, backed up by some upgraded Gondor infantry, and then in the middle, some guards of Osgiliath. And finally, at the back, he has the vanguard of King Elisar, so the heavy swordsman bodyguard unit with the general right here. So we'll see how well they can do. Again, they're another unit which should do pretty well against Harad, but of course the armour can still be a bit of a problem. An interesting army to be sure. And then onto the other side, we move on to Death Eater, who's going to be playing as Numenor, so Numenor once again. The armour-piercing spears, the Nardukadar on the flank, as well as the Seafarers of Nindamos, the Abarim making up the front line, a very, very powerful unit of infantry, of course. The Bawabarim as well, another unit which you need to be very careful with. The armour-piercing arrows can be so lethal, but if you use them on the wrong target, it's very bad for you. We have the Pharazim Swordmasters as well, who are stronger, I think, certainly than the vanguard of King Elisar, but still very, very expensive at the same time. And also a sort of mirrored front line there with the Seafarers and the Spears on the other side as well. 2 units of Karibarim as well, so the Spear Cavalry for Numenor is going to be roaming around the field as well. So we certainly have a pretty beefy force of cavalry on our side of things. We'll see how well the enemy matches up against that. And then finally the Pharazim Nobles as well, so a very, very powerful unit of sword cavalry with the General's Bodyguard in it. Or with the General in it, I should say. It's a General's Bodyguard unit. And as if that wasn't enough from a cavalry perspective, we finally have Dwayling, who's going to be playing as Dol Amroth, of course, one of the factions which certainly dips an awful lot into their cavalry. So we may as well have a look at their cavalry first of all. So his General's Bodyguard is the Arathirim of Dol Amroth, a unit of Lance Knights, obviously very, very lethal off the charge. They don't have quite as many men in the unit as other knights, because of course Dol Amroth are a little bit more focused around their melee cavalry and their Haven Knights, which have more. But the Arathirim are slightly cheaper. They're still very expensive, of course, because of the power they bring, but still. Horse Archers as well, so the Parathil Riders. I will be interested to see how the Horse Archers are used here, because this is probably the narrowest section of the map over here, which is unfortunate for Dol Amroth really, because I'm sure they would have preferred a wider field so they could use their cavalry. And then he's gone for a couple more units of defensive cavalry as well, the Parathil Horse Guard, so some very nice melee cavalry in comparison to the basic Merc cavalry, which are sort of the benchmark you can use for melee cavalry. The Parathil Horse Guard are significantly stronger. And then the infantry and archers that Dol Amroth has brought, he's gone for some Doran Ernil archers with the armour upgrade, so he's looking to try and wear down the enemy, backed up by a unit of Tirithea marksmen as well, so some good quality in there as well. And then a combination of, looks like that, yeah, there's some dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan in there, which of course previously the Talon Knights, so a very, very high-end unit of infantry being used to hold together the Ethelond men-at-arms and the Doran Ernil pikemen, who are both together, so a pretty effective phalanx here. And with those dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan, they will actually be able to hold for quite some time. And then finally some Tarnostian Spearmen just here in reserve, which can go where they are needed. Now, moving on, we have sort of on the road that leads into the main settlement on the map, we have Khand, played by the Lucky Hussar, or Lucky Hussar now as he is called. I think he plays Khand quite a lot, so he's very, very used to the roster, and I'm a big fan of Khand as well. I think they've got a lot of nice tools. He's got some nomadic raiders here on the front, so just some cheap archers. He will actually lose the skirmish fight against the Doran Ernil archers now, though, with the armour upgrade, especially if the Parathil riders come forward as well. So he does need to be a little bit careful, but of course one thing Khand can most certainly do is field skirmishes in vast quantities, and that's still a very valid strategy for them to undertake, even if, the lower tier archers have been toned down from 0.96. Some Nurad Retainers, which are another example of some very nice melee cavalry. I think the Parathil Horse Guard would still beat them 1-to-1, but Khand can bring the Nurad Retainers in greater numbers, so it's definitely an interesting fight between those two units on the field. A lot of Nurad halberds as well, so the Nurad unit's obviously the heart and soul of the Khandish infantry force. Most people who play Khand will tell you the Nurads offer Khand a surprisingly good infantry force. Certainly a difference between them and Rohan, I think, is that Rohan you need to be a lot more careful with their infantry. They can still field a lot of infantry as well, but you need to be a little bit more savvy about it, whereas Khand, they can field a good old-fashioned phalanx and be very comfortable with that. So decent armour on them, but of course as a phalanx unit they lack a shield, so it's unlikely to be too good for them if they get shot up. Some nice armour piercing nonetheless, backed up by some nomadic light infantry, very cheap units of infantry of course, which can do their thing. Some Nurad footmen, again armour piercing infantry with big shields, so armour piercing is a good choice for them to have brought, honestly, because all of us on the other side have brought factions which can at least rely heavily on their armour. Even if I brought mostly militia units, that's not going to be a problem for Khand because I'm right on the other side of the field. He's got the Nurad Storm Guard in here, I think that's what they're called now. Yep, they are, the Nurad Storm Guard. Obviously the multiple HP halberdiers, extremely powerful from the front. If you don't have anything to counter the Storm Guard, they can do tons of damage. And then also the Brotherhood of the Spear, one of the new units for Khand, so obviously the Brotherhood units are the upper end units that Khand can bring of infantry and cavalry, and the Spearmen are a new version of that. Interesting spears, I must say. It almost looks like they almost look like they're made of foam, but still they're very, very good. You know, they're very, very highly thought of by people who play Khand. Nomadic Marauders as well, you can see that they're now javelins to make sure that Khand have retained that armor piercing on foot, because of course axe throws have been changed so that they're not AP, but Khand need those javelins on foot to be more effective. Some more Nomad Retainers over here. He's got some Nomadic Light Cavalry up here in the town as well. We'll see if the town actually comes into play here, because, you know, Khand would be within their rights to retreat back here, but there's also a nice path which leads right around the back over there, so we'll see if that is used also. We also have Umbar, played by Hazarama, who was playing as Imbladris in the last battle I showed from this particular series. He's got some Nara and Aru Royal Guard up here on the hill, as well as a Trebuchet, so he's definitely using the terrain to his advantage, which, honestly, on maps like this, I genuinely, you know, don't hold it against someone if they use terrain to their advantage. It's the right thing to do. I'm technically doing it in the farmstead as well. He's got some Alcarondas Faithful over here, which are very similar to the Arathirim. They have a few less men in the unit as far as knights go, but they are so powerful individually. Very, very powerful melee knights. Umbar's cavalry is extremely powerful, you just can't afford to field a lot of it. Some Corsair infantry, so some basic sort of archer infantry hybrids similar to the Lake Town infantry. Going to be trying to poke and prod away at Numenor, albeit they probably won't be able to do a great deal of damage. We've got some Alcarondas Legion, which will be able to go toe-to-toe with the Romena Abarim, as well as some Narun Aru Sentinels. Some Balakith Axeguard, or Balaketh Axeguard. Armor piercing is going to be important to try and help wear down the Númenórean and Dol Amroth front line, and he's gone for the other units of knights as well, so the warlords, which is probably why his army looks so small. I'm sure he's got some blackguards, maybe some rangers or some crossbows hidden around here as well, but his army looks small because bringing both units of knights is extremely expensive. Then we move on to Harad, who has sort of deployed themselves a little bit on this higher ground here. Some Haradrim spearmen guarding the front. Just in behind them, some Mahud Beast Hunters. Of course, javelins can be very useful against Gondor should they get into range. And then the armor-piercing phalanx of the Southron Warband and Pikemen. Overall, not overly expensive to bring them, but potentially very effective. Some Trollmen of Harad on both flanks, another unit which can be very effective against Gondor because of how powerful they are in melee. The Demons of the Desert, of course, unsurprising to see them because of how, you know, brutally effective they can be. The Black Serpents, which is where the general's going to be, very, very good at cycle charging in and out with their speed and their high charge bonus, but not great in melee against other cav in spite of their multiple HP. And some Serpent Guard, very much the same thing, only not a general's bodyguard unit, and of course the Mumakil. You know what the Mumakil are all about. They will probably be used a little bit more conservatively, but Gondor have not brought any javelins or any high damage skirmish units, so the Mumakil could have a field day against Gondor. It's one thing you always have to bear in mind. Even if, you know, Harad don't bring the Mumakil, oftentimes the opponent will be forced to bring Mumakil counters, because if they don't, you can find yourself in this situation where the Mumakil could, in theory, run right on through the Gondorian lines and open a huge amount of gaps for their infantry to exploit. And then finally, we have Party Juice, who's going to be playing as Rune. He's got some Narim here on the front line, certainly stronger than my skirmishers, but not more numerous. He also has some Scion Rim, which obviously, you know, Rune's infantry is certainly going to be stronger than mine overall. Some very, very nice spearmen, which I believe also inspire nearby troops, which is very nice for the Easterlings to have. He's got some Inas Rim, which the Inas Rim finally have a shield, which is one very interesting omission that's always been a part of their thing. But it made them kind of ill-advisable to bring, because in spite of their heavy armour, they were still vulnerable to skirmishers from all angles. But that's not the case anymore, so now they are much more of a heavy cataphract unit, which is much more viable to bring, and they're going to be riding with the Dragons Wrath Warlords, very similar actually to my Royal Court unit functionally. He's got some crossbows, which could be a problem for me if they get in close, because they're cheaper than my own. Some Gamp Rim. My pikes should be able to keep them at range, that's the idea anyway, so you can see that moving forward would have been a terrible idea for me with all this cavalry. I'd have been cycle charged into oblivion before I ever reached his lines. Some Scion Rim, a huge amount of Flag Rim, which is going to be a problem for me, even if, you know, a lot of my troops are not armoured. The Flag Rim are just so much better than my infantry that I have brought, as well as some more Gamp Rim, and the main reason I'm glad I didn't choose a more aggressive composition with Cardlin here is the Chariots. The Wain Riders of Rune. If I had moved forward with the Chariots on the field, it would have just taken just a bit of savvy chariot play, and my army would have been in complete disarray. So I'm very glad that I did not do that. But without further ado, let us begin. We will be making liberal use, of course, of the half-speed mechanic, because in terms of frames, it isn't the longest match, but a ton happened in this battle, which was very interesting to behold. So you can see that I'm going to be trying to hold down this farmstead and make it a little bit more difficult for Rune. Gondor is also going to be trying to figure out how to coax Harad to come towards them. That shouldn't be too difficult, because they can just wheel some of their archers forward and start poking and prodding away at Harad themselves. You can see that already my catapult is going to start bombarding the runic lines, but The Rune player doesn't panic, to be fair. He does not charge in unthinkingly. He does start to probe my lines with the chariots, but ultimately he doesn't go charging in unthinkingly. He is going to think about this and potentially go about this in a different way. Of course, the fact that I'm playing a little bit more statically does mean that Rune could consider trying to help Herard wipe out Gondor so they can then move in on me. It'll be interesting to see if that does indeed turn out to be the case. But first of all, we can see that Numenor are the ones that are going to be most aggressive first of all. They're going to be moving in. But you can see that the Naru and Aru Royal Guard are immediately going to get them in their sights and start firing away. The Trebuchet is also up here on the hill. The Corsair Infantry also going to start opening up. But of course, most of the Numenorian infantry here is very well armoured and have got very nice shield bows as well. So ultimately, the Trebuchet is the only thing that will do extreme damage if it gets some direct hits, which, to be fair, it has managed to pick up a few casualties so far. And you can see that what's going to be happening here is a bit of isolation tactics going on. So you can see that what Dol Amroth is going to be doing is they're going to be moving forward and trying to block any Khandish reinforcements from assisting Umbar, and then Dol Amroth's cavalry combined with the full might of Numenor will then be able to try and overwhelm Umbar. And considering Umbar have gone for a little bit more of a quality approach rather than quantity, it does mean that there will be many gaps to exploit. So this could get pretty messy pretty quickly for Umbar if he doesn't receive any sort of backup. Fortunately, however, he does have his ally Herard just over this hill, and Herard does have a lot of very fast-moving cavalry. So there's no reason for Umbar to panic just yet, but the Corsair Infantry are going to have to move backwards here as Numenor being played in exactly the right way here. In the last battle we saw Numenor being played a little bit too conservatively, but in this battle Death Eater has most certainly got the right idea. He is moving forward and he is taking the fight to Umbar, although to be fair, Umbar are certainly one of those factions which can meet force with force. And you can see here, it is interesting though the Doran Ernal pikemen are the ones leading the way, because they are a very juicy target indeed for any of the Khandish skirmishers. Definitely the Tarnostian spearmen should just be the ones moving in, but the Dol Amroth infantry are going to be moving to block. Some of the Dol Amroth infantry, however, is also going to be moving in over here. A nice catch here from the Numenorian cavalry, the Karabarim or Karibarim, charging into the Corsair infantry. They need to get out of there now though, because otherwise the Adunaim Shield Guard, or Numenorian Shield Guard, are going to get in there. And of course that will be very nasty for them, as well as the Alcarondas Faithful, but they actually broke there. So that does go to show that you know, even very elite units of cavalry, if you charge them into a very poor situation for them with those high-tier Numenorian spearmen and the extremely powerful Alcarondas Faithful, which cause fear to enemy cavalry units, I believe, it's going to be pretty nasty for you. I think it's already time, actually, for half speed to be introduced. You can see over here that I've got my spearmen in the front, and they're going to be sort of trying to shield my pikemen from being shot up by those arrows. You can see here that they may look like flaming projectiles, but the Narim's flaming arrows are just cosmetic only. They look cool, but they don't actually do anything other than just cause a neat effect to appear on units they shoot. Although maybe they'll induce a little bit of panic in some players, I don't know. The Warlords are here. You see the Innas Rim are already becoming shaken as well, which is a problem for them because the Innas Rim got a little bit too close to my lines, and if you hover too long in front of the Cardland crossbows, you're going to be in for a very nasty time indeed. And if I can cut away Rune's cavalry, then I will move forward with my own lances and really start to do some damage on the runic backlines. But certainly I'm playing the long game over here. My lower tier archers and my crossbows are opening up onto the runic positions, so I'm trying to do as much damage as I possibly can. And you can see over here that, honestly, even if a few arrows do hit my pikemen, I'm not too concerned about that because I have enough pikes that I can absorb the odd casualty. And for the most part, I do have my spearmen in front, which of course with their shield value, they're going to be able to absorb a decent amount of arrow fire. So this is where going numbers heavy really does help you, because you can engage in this kind of warfare for a long period of time and be reasonably okay. Mercenary cavalry over here, of course. I can't afford to lose too many units, because then if Rune come forward in force, I won't have the numbers to hold myself together, and my morale will start to suffer as a result. You can also see that Gondor is starting to pressure Rune a little bit. Herard has been extremely static so far, not eager to charge into the teeth of the Gondorian army, which is not too surprising with the build they brought, to be honest. Those Gondorian archers would be very nasty. But he also needs to start thinking, I think, about moving to the aid of his ally, because you can see up here on the hill, already, Numenor have pushed Umbar right off the high ground. Umbar have they have managed to save what they had up on the hill, but ultimately at this point Umbar are being forced into pretty much a full retreat, and they don't have a huge amount of space left to play with before they hit the mountains, which are impassable. But yeah, it's going to be interesting here to see how Umbar deal with this, because they're definitely on the retreat, but you can see that Harad are sending over some units to help, and it is the mighty Mumakil. There's also the Hashari Shadows, which have revealed themselves. Honestly, I probably would have just sent the Serpent Guard over here to harry the enemy backlines, because unlike Gondor, who are unprepared for the Mumakil, Numenor most certainly are prepared with the Seafarers of Nindamos, and also they have the support of Dol Amroth up here. You can see the Parathil Riders have quickly managed to take up a position on the hill, and they're now starting to fire their projectiles. A few of them are hitting the floor, but most of them honestly are hitting their marks. Maybe not the most efficient target to go after in all of these heavily armoured and shielded Numenorians, but ultimately it is still putting pressure on the Umbar lines, and Umbar don't have enough numbers to really deal with this sort of pressure for a long period of time. They definitely need some help from their allies, and it is good to see that the Mumakil at the very least are doing so. Khan have retreated. Unfortunately, however, I think Umbar have really drawn the short straw in this engagement, because Numenor and Dol Amroth are really putting the screws to them. Harad are not moving in on Gondor or committing too much in the way of help for Umbar, and Rune are kind of stuck in a sort of long, atrocious ground war with me, and Khan can't really get to Umbar to assist him without going through a Dol Amroth rearguard. Now, fortunately for Khans, they have paid attention to the map, and they are sending their cavalry right around the back through the mountain pathway, and they are going to be able to get in behind Dol Amroth. We'll see if Dol Amroth notice this, but this will at least cause Dol Amroth some problems. But I don't know, I don't think there's much in the way of lances they've got going on over there. I mean, nomadic light cavalry is lower end horse archers, which are not going to be too much of a problem, you would suspect. There's the trebuchet very narrowly missing there, the Numenorian line. You can see here that certainly using the high ground to their advantage. What's going on here? And you can see that now Gondor are going to be moving forward with a few archers to try and put pressure on Harad to force them to either move forward or move backwards. This is sort of, again, forcing the issue, which you should absolutely do with your skirmishes. If I had one criticism here, Gondor really should have done this sooner. Because Harad were really offering no resistance. There was no reason not to do this other than the Mumakil's presence, I suppose. But if the Mumakil decided to come forward even when Gondor were further back, it would have been a bit of a disaster for Gondor anyway, so you may as well try and force the issue. And the Caer Andros marksmen are going to start shooting in, and it'll be interesting to see what Harad try to do. It does look as though they're going to shift over to the side, perhaps. Can we get a little bit closer to Umbar? We shall see. What are they shooting at, actually? Yeah, they're going to go for the Beast Hunts, I think, which is not a bad target. They've got shields, but very poor armour. So you can see here, Rune. I think Rune was caught in two minds of what to do. But what I would say is, I think Rune probably would have been better off just being extremely aggressive right from the off. Just because my archers wouldn't have been able to target everything, and ultimately my infantry, while it is efficient at holding the line, it's not really the best at getting kills. And the terrain is actually such that my crossbows probably would not have been able to do what I wanted them to do fully. And you can see that I have actually sent over some crossbows to help out my ally as well. My cavalry may be melee cavalry, but it would have been pretty easily overwhelmed, I think, especially considering the damage chariots and the warlords can do. Got some spears out here on the flank, but as it is, we are bogged down in a ground war here, very atrocious, and that suits me because that's exactly the kind of fight that I wanted. This is exactly what I prepared for, whereas looking at Rune's army, with all of his cavalry and his chariots, I think what he was hoping for was for me to sort of shift forwards a little bit, and for him to get right and behind my lines with his chariots. But in order to do that, he needs to occupy the attention of a lot of my units. Otherwise, I'm just going to focus his chariots and his cavalry down, whereas what he's doing now, he's losing a lot of his manpower over time just because he's playing into my hands a little bit. This isn't going to win or lose the battle for either of us. If it comes down to it in the late game in an infantry fight, I could still very easily lose it. But certainly for now, things are going the way that I wanted them to. The Warlords of Umbar charging right into the guts of the Dol Amroth lines. The Parathil Riders are here, which is a battle the Warlords of Umbar would win, so the Dol Amroth horse archers may be getting a little bit too far ahead of their support, or a little bit too far away from their support, I should say. Tirithea marksmen up here on the hills. The Remen and Ardukadar taking up their position as well. The Bawabarim are getting into position. And they'll be able to do a huge amount of damage to any unit. They have their pick, really, of any unit they want. But now the Trebuchet is starting to fling rotten meat, which is a sign that it's out of ammunition, and it's run out of ammunition without doing significant damage, which is another bad thing for Umbar, because the Trebuchet is another very expensive unit. And you can see here on the front line that Umbar at this point are just being bled away at the wrists. The enemy skirmishers are really doing a number on their front line, and as soon as these shield guard and sentinels are gone, they don't really have any sort of defense against cavalry other than their own cavalry, and that's so small in number that I think Numenor and Dol Amroth can wipe them from the field pretty easily. So yeah, Harad, I think they need to support their ally here, because Harad have been completely static, which for Harad, that's very odd, to be honest with you. Harad are traditionally an aggressive faction. They haven't done anything wrong as of yet, but honestly, you know, they need to do something here, Harad, whether to help Rune smash me to pieces, whether to move on Gondor with their Mumakil, destroy them, and then flank me, and then hope that in the late game they can defeat Dol Amroth and Numenor, or they need to help Umbar. They need to make a choice of what to do here, because staying still is not really paying dividends for their team. Lucky Hussar's Horse Archers are doing their thing, but what Lucky Hussar really would have wanted in this situation is a unit of Knights or Lancers, because then he would have been able to be much more proactive in the backfield, because I can tell you from playing in this game that the Dol Amroth player did not notice that cavalry until it started shooting into his backlines. If that was a unit of Lancers that all of a sudden had charged into the rear of his infantry, that could have been something to turn the fight around, especially if that was combined with Khan's infantry. Khan's infantry, however, is also static, but to be fair to Khan, honestly, I feel as though maybe what they perhaps should have done, Khan, is try and smash this line to pieces when they could. They do have javelins after all, and it's a very skeleton crew defense over here, and Umbar is in dire straits at this point, as now Numenor are starting to advance down from the hill. The Remena Nardukadar engaging the Alcarondas Legion, which probably will go in favour of Umbar, but there's ever more forces coming down the hill. The Seafarers of Nindamos getting charged actually by the Alcarondas faithful, the Umbar general, but it's still going to be a pretty punishing engagement this for Umbar. They really just don't have the numbers to withstand an all-out assault here, and now Dol Amroth and Numenor are going to be moving in together as one to do the business, and Harad's still proving to be a little bit indecisive. They are now moving forward, I think, and it looks as though they are going to sort of try and get into Gondor a little bit more. We shall see. You can see over here that the Lokanar Rim are still trying to skirmish down with me, but again, this is another thing which plays right into my hands, because the Greenway Garrison Spearmen are really, really good at absorbing arrow fire. Not only are they cheap, so I don't really care if they take casualties, but also their shields are very nice. So ultimately absorbing a lot of this runic ammunition, and this elongated engagement, which I was really hoping for in this fight, has come to pass. And you can see that I have taken losses here on the front line over time, but it's not a huge amount, and honestly, I think Rune have they've certainly taken more losses in more important units than mine. The casualties we've taken overall have probably been fairly similar, but for me, only militia units have I lost, whereas Rune have lost Inas Rim. They're now losing Gamp Rim. Yeah, I mean, one of their units of Inas Rim has almost been completely cut down by my crossbows, which is one of the reasons why you can't afford to hover in this sort of position against Rune, against Cardinal rather, because their crossbows will hack you to pieces. And if that wasn't enough, the runic crossbows have also been trying to do some damage of their own, but I've been pretty much focusing them down with my low tier archers, and of course the Eastron crossbows do very poorly under arrow fire. My catapult's still trying to do the business. The catapult, to be fair, hasn't done a huge amount of damage. Most of the shots have missed, but the additional kills that it's got have just been a little bit of a bonus, and all of this fighting definitely suits me more than it suits Rune. You can see now that Harad are trying to get in here. I'm not sure what they're hoping to accomplish with the Serpent Guard over here. It looks like they were trying to get a charge off into the Gondor Militia Archers, but the Gondorians moved to block that particular avenue of attack. The Pinnithgalen Cavalry are here. The Inas Rim are now going to ride with the Serpent Guard, so it's going to be lance to lance here. In this fight, if it were in a vacuum, I'd probably back the Pinnithgalen Cavalry, because I think their defensive values are higher, being Gondorian. Whereas the Haradrim are much better when they're using their aggressive tendencies, cycle charging in and out. You can see here the Militia Archers are in position. I also have my crossbows back here, which I'm moving to support my ally here in Gondor. Gondor, however, now, this is perhaps what Harad should have done sooner, because Gondor don't have a huge amount of infantry. They've got a lot of archers, and now Harad are pushing forward very aggressively. And Gondor only have a limited amount of infantry. You can see the Hashari Shadows getting into position. If they shoot down the line of the Gondorians, things could get messy pretty quickly. The Trollmen are getting in here. So you can see that my Tharbad Riders are over here, as well as my Royal Court of House Thorondor. What I'm trying to do is try and help zone out the Haradrim. I would have liked to have used my Lancers a little bit more aggressively on Rune, now that they're being softened up. But needs must. Honestly, if I leave my ally here, they're going to start to struggle against Harad. And you can see here the Hashari Shadows immediately starting to shoot. But the Tharbad Riders from the front do have those nice round shields. You can see over here as well the Serpent Guard charging into the Gondor Infantry, a very nice charge there into the Lion Infantry, and already they're becoming shaken. Obviously the Haradrim Lancers are very, very nice indeed. Fortunately, however, Numenor was also not oblivious to Harad's sudden aggressive push after being static for so long. And now we are going to be able to sandwich the Hashari Shadows and completely destroy them between the Karibarim and the Tharbad Riders. So yeah, very, very easy. You can see the Karibarim already just absolutely butchering them off the charge, and this is going to be the final straw for them, because of course the Tharbad Riders have got an absolutely brutal charge of their own. Meanwhile, you can see here that Umbar are in dire straits. The combination of the very aggressive push from both Dol Amroth and Numenor is going to be able to overwhelm them. Really, it's just a case of, can the elite Umbar forces do enough damage to Dol Amroth and Numenor to make it more difficult for our team in the long run. Pharazim Nobles getting a rear charge there into the Alcarondas Legion. The Arathirium are moving down the hill, but only into their own men, so I'm not sure what they hope to accomplish there. Tirithea Marksman shooting away. You can see that here in the backfield, the problem that Lucky Hussar had with this sort of rear assault, he had some Nurad Retainers but they're melee cavalry, he had some Nomadic Light Raiders but they're light horse archers. He didn't really have the muscle to really take advantage of the fact that he did manage to take Dol Amroth by surprise, and now of course Dol Amroth have got their own horse archers, they've got their horse guard, they've got all of their cavalry running a defensive position. However, Khan have committed forward more of their infantry now, and you can see here that the Nurad Halberds and the infantry are getting in position. I think he realised he needed to move forward with something, but he also needs to move forward with something a little bit more substantial than this, because as it is, the Doran Ernil pikemen will be ideal for holding this position. He does have those javelins colliding with the Dol Amroth front line, which should be enough to soften them up a little bit. But Khan definitely need to come forward in force here, because if they do, this Dol Amroth wing could completely collapse, and then Numenor and Dol Amroth will have the decision to make. Meanwhile, you can see over here the Loka in Asarim getting another nice rear charge there into the forces. So suddenly, Rune committing their cavalry over to try and help Harad kill Gondor. You can see my rural court of House Thorondor are now trying to move to the assistance of my ally. And at this point you can see, I can tell that if I just sit there, Rune are going to move over with more of their forces to help crush my ally. So I am now going to move forward and engage the runic infantry. And again, this could be risky for me, because honestly my infantry is not that great on the attack that I brought. I've got a lot of pikes, a lot of low tier spears. Really it's only my Dunedain captains and my wardens I've got which are any good. So it's risky for me. But if I can use my crossbows and my lancers to pick the enemy apart, hopefully I can do enough damage to save my infantry. You can see here, this is the problem that Gondor have. If you're up against Harad, you need to bring, the Pelagia Marines would have been the best choice, of course, for Gondor to try and help counteract the Mumakil, a unit of high damage skirmishers. But as it is, the Mumakil are right in and amongst the marksmen of Caer Andros. And to be fair, the Mumakil will still take damage over a long period of time if they get caught in melee. The marksmen of Caer Andros are no slouches. But if the Mumakil keep moving, the chaos that it will cause in the Gondorian ranks is not going to be good. The Serpent Guard now cycling out, the Guards of Osgiliath are shaken, and you can see that all of the armour piercing, you can see that the Númenórean cavalry has also moved across to try and help out. Harad have got a relatively thin line themselves, but with the Trollmen, with the Demons of the Desert, with the Mahud Beast Hunters, there's a lot of AP they've got, even the Southrons as well. So they're going to match up quite nicely here against the somewhat limited Gondorian infantry line, as the barbed spears and pikes make their presence felt. You can see here that there are just 2 Serpent Guard left holding up a huge blob of Gondorians. I'm trying to also support with my crossbows, and I did see the Demons of the Desert coming, so I was like, I need to kill them. If the Demons of the Desert get a few nice volleys off, the Gondorians could be in massive trouble. Let's see what's going on in Umbar's world. Umbar not having a great time of it as you would expect, but still clinging to life. A lesser faction probably would have completely crumbled by now, and honestly buying time for his allies, because Harad is not having the worst of times. And now that I'm being forced into a melee engagement with Rune, things could start to get pretty messy for me as well. So the longer Umbar holds on and prevents all of these Númenóreans from being freed up to go to other places on the map, the better it will be for us. Or the better it will be for them, rather. The Alcarondas Legion, defeat may seem certain, but still they will fight to the bitter end against their Númenórean brethren. And there's a lot of Dol Amroth forces as well. Dol Amroth, I think, are trying to start to peel off more and more of their infantry. You can see that the Tirithea marksmen up here on the hill, trying to use the superior terrain to their advantage. And now you can see Doesn't look like anything more has been committed, but the nomadic marauders with their javelins, proving why javelins are such a nice tool for affecting a line battle. Dol Amroth starting to struggle to hold this line now, because it is only Tarnostian shield bearers and Doran Ernil pikemen, very basic units which don't necessarily do damage all that quickly. And Khan could certainly use that to their advantage. Meanwhile, here in the backfield, nomadic light cavalry still proving to be a thorn in the side of Dol Amroth, and now the Nurad retainers, the other unit of Nurad retainers this might be, as well as the wind blades. So the wind blades were hidden. Very lethal unit of melee cavalry. They are now both proved to be a bit of a thorn in Dol Amroth's rear. You know, Dol Amroth are going to need to respond to this because they're wide open for a rear charge. It may only be melee cavalry, but the mass can still prove to be a real problem. And this could be the breakthrough that Khan was looking for. These Tirathair marksmen are very well positioned, however. Well, I say that, a lot of their arrows are actually going into the floor. They would be better positioned if they were closer to the edge here, because then they would have a beautiful shot right into the heart of this Khandish push. But you can see the Brotherhood of the Spear are now also moving their way forwards, as well as a very worrying sight for Dol Amroth will be the Nurad Storm Guard, because they're so good in melee. Multiple HP phalanx units like the Nurad Storm Guard and the Karas Galadhon's Guardians from Lothlorien, if they get into an engagement which they are efficient in, they're so good. So difficult to wear down. Meanwhile, you can see here that the Harad armor piercing, and this is why I'm actually quite confused as to why Harad didn't push forward more aggressively from the start. With their Mumakil, with all of their armor piercing trollmen and javelins, this would have been the result. Gondor would not have had an answer for it, and as it was, Gondor was able to sort of get a bit of value off their archers before Harad moved in, and even the lancers, so Gondor really struggling. And unlike last time where Steel Khan struggled as a result of sort of being focused down a little bit more, his army was fine in the last match where he was Mordor. In this case, I think that more than anything, his army was what worked against him. He had too many archers, really. He really should have traded in, I think, perhaps his Gondor archers for the Pelagia Marines, because that would have given him not only a tool to use against the Mumakil, but also against some of the Trollmen, which would have been very nice for them. You can see over here, I'm having a bit of a tough time of it now as well. The chariots are really starting to do some damage to me. My Minhariath archers are in melee, but here in the middle, where I'm at my strongest, my Wardens of Tir Gorthad and all of my Cardinal spears and pikes are starting to overwhelm the enemy, but I really need to make sure that I make this advantage stick. I'm trying to get some rear charges off with my mercenary cavalry, but they're right in and amongst it here. And unfortunately for me, getting rear charges is not really something which is going to yield the results I want, purely because the front line is mainly made up of halberdiers and spearmen, which means as soon as they turn around, the mercenary cavalry is going to get absolutely ripped apart. And as if that wasn't enough, the Dragon's Wrath Warlords are also doing the business. My mercenary cavalry trying to charge into the flag room to prevent them from joining the front line more than anything else. You can see there the Alcarondas Faithful from Umbar, Eastron crossbowmen as well. My Tharbad riders are in behind the enemy lines, and I'm going to try and finish off what's left of the runic skirmishes to make sure that they can't do any damage to my front line, because at this point, while I certainly hold a big numbers advantage, I need to be careful, because the chariots, they're right in behind me. They're taking damage. I think the chariots are hanging around in melee with my pikes for too long. But if I'm not careful, I'm doomed at the hands of those chariots. My line will break. You can see that over here I've just got some Greenway Garrison archers and spears going up against Flagrim. The result of that fight will be very obvious. The Easterlings will clean up against my low tier units. Another unit of quality I do have, however, are my Dunedain Captains, and this is something Rune don't really have an answer to, not an easy one. So if I manage to kill off all of the runic skirmishers, the Dunedain Captains should be able to monster things in melee, and that will be very good for me. Of course, you can see my Merc Cavalry breaking, unsurprisingly. Back here, the joint force of my Lancers now finally has what they want. They have the soft, vulnerable underbelly of Rune to charge into, and that's what my Royal Courthouse Thorondor and my Tharbad riders will continue to do. However, Numenor coming over here with their cavalry to try and support Gondor, because Gondor definitely need it here. Pinneth Galen cavalry getting into the rear of the Southron pikemen, who are now wavering. They should break, honestly, but if they don't, Gondor will lose yet more of their cavalry. My catapult's out of ammunition. Most of my crossbows are also starting to become out of ammunition now as well. I think it's only my gatekeepers that actually still have ammo. But you can see that Harad, the Demons of the Desert, are in melee, which is not ideal for them, to be honest with you. But with the support of the Númenórean cavalry, as well as my crossbowman, we managed to salvage what could have been a devastating situation for Gondor, and as it is, Gondor and Harad have fought one another to a standstill, effectively. So that's good, because myself and Rune are now engaged in a very bloody war indeed. Umbar, amazingly, is still alive, which, again, is really helping his team out, because all of this Númenórean infantry is blobbed up on very limited Umbar forces, and that's buying him a lot of time indeed. Meanwhile, here in the backfield, the Nurad Windblades still doing their thing, destroying the Dor and Ernil archers, and the Windblades will be able to defeat the Arathirium in melee as well. Much more of a melee cavalry focused unit. The Windblades are also extremely fast. Now over here you can see that Dol Amroth are starting to try and shore up their line a little bit more. Skirmishes that are out of ammunition are being committed to melee. Some infantry which was helping out the Númenóreans against Umbar is now arriving on the front line, but it may already be too late, honestly. Dol Amroth's line is being pushed back, with Brotherhood of the Spear on the front line with the Storm Guard. Dol Amroth are starting to struggle to hold this choke point. Could be very, very nasty for Dol Amroth indeed. And you can see over there the Nurad Halberds are moving in, Nomadic Marauders coming back for another bite of the cherry, and there's no archers nearby, so they're going to be uncontested as they throw into the Dol Amroth infantry line. There goes the Gondorian general, gutted and beheaded by one of the Trollmen. So I think it's time we went up to 1 speed actually, considering things are getting a little bit more manageable to see across the field. The Demons of the Desert still fighting hard on the front line against basic Gondorians, but they're so outnumbered at this point. The Black Serpents are now charging into my crossbows, and honestly that was a pretty lethal charge right into a vulnerable portion, but they need to get out of melee with the Minotaur Roman Guardians pretty quickly, because of course they'll get those halberds out and they'll start to poke away at the Black Serpents, but that Harad cavalry is still proving to be a real pain in the neck. But also you can see here that my Minharia sharpshooters are here, my archers. I'm starting to send over infantry to try and support Gondor, because you can see that with the support of my cavalry rear-charging the enemy, my Royal Courthouse Thorondor and my Tharbad Riders, as well as the Caribrim as well from Númenor, all of these units of cavalry really doing a nice job. The Flagrim taking a rear charge there. I really love the look of the Royal Courthouse Thorondor, I must say. But over here, Rune were going to win, but that's not going to last for too much longer with rear charges like that. And of course we're working up the line, so at this point Rune are pretty much done and dusted. There goes the Númenórean general though, the Nurad Windblades, proving to be too much for what was left of the Farazim nobles after Númenor's aggressive antics earlier on, sending over what's left of my infantry over here to help finish off Rune, and the Caribrim are also over here. So this is going to be the end of Rune, and I will still have an infantry force left alive. Admittedly, it's mostly Greenway units supported by the Wardens and the Dunedain captains, but I also have my Royal Courthouse Thorondor. I also still have my Tharbad Riders as well. So my army, while battered and bruised, after being forced into an engagement maybe a little bit sooner than I would have liked, I do still have what I need to be effective. Ultimately, the early game went exactly as I wanted, which is good, because otherwise, if I had been forced to do that earlier, Rune would have been able to finish me off pretty easily, honestly. As things stand, however, we can see over here, got my mercenary cavalry here trying to help finish off the Demons of the Desert. The Guards of Osgiliath are here. But yeah, Gondor and Harad are basically both gone at this point. They both evaporated one another, which basically means the red team's hopes and dreams are going to be resting on Khan's shoulders. But Khan also had a pretty healthy army, and you can see here that they have completely eviscerated this Dol Amroth front line. The support of those javelins and then those elite units, all of the armour piercing that Khan can bring to bear, proving to be too much for that Dol Amroth rear guard. And now, this is perhaps what Khan should have done a little bit sooner, to be honest with you, because they really only started to move forward in earnest when it was very clear that Umbar was already, completely destroyed and Umbar are gone. And now, even though they have managed to basically defeat Dol Amroth, Khan's only reward for that is the fact that they must now go into Númenor. Númenor, however, will still be damaged from their antics against Umbar, so I would still give the advantage to Khan here, but I don't know if Khan are going to have the manpower left to mulch their way through everything that we have left. We shall see. You can see there the nomadic raiders starting to pour a bunch of arrow fire into the enemy as they move forward. There was also some javelins there as well. There goes Umbar's general, finally at the hands of the Gondor militia archers of all things, as well as the Caribrim. Brotherhood of the Spear up against Ramina Abarim. All of the armor piercing is going to serve Khan quite well here, especially against the already somewhat battered and bruised Numenorians after their war against Umbar. But let's see what's happening over here. Yeah, and that's pretty much the end. That's the end of Rune. Perfect timing. So this is pretty much what I have left from an infantry perspective. A lot of pikes, a few spears, some sharpshooters, and then over here I believe I also have my Dunedain captains and some of my crossbowmen also. Yeah. So my army's not in terrible condition, so even if Khan do manage to pull out the victory against Numenor, which is fairly likely considering their armour piercing and their javelins, I still have enough infantry to hopefully finish them off in the late game. And then as if that wasn't enough, myself and Numenor still have a few units of nice shock cavalry that we can commit. My Tharbad Riders, my Royal Court House Durondor, and the Caribarim are also on their way over here. I also still have 11 mercenary cavalry, but they're pretty much going to break on contact, I think. The Arathirim are still alive, interestingly enough. The nomadic marauders must be out of ammunition, otherwise Lucky Hussar wouldn't be committing them to this fight here. There goes the Harajam general, finally killed off by my Minhariath archers. And we're now in the dying embers of this fight. Dol Amroth still have a few forces left, but ultimately, you know, Dol Amroth are also largely gone. The only armies with any significant numbers left on the field are myself, Numenor, and Khan at this point. And Numenor going to start to struggle against this phalanx that Khan have going on. But really, the ace in the hole that we have is the fact that I still have a lot of pikemen, so even if Khan do win this, I should be able to use my pikemen to keep those Nurad halberds and Storm Guard at bay. And we still have cavalry, so we can still recharge the enemy. The Royal Court House Durondor and the Tharbad Riders are here. The Caribarim charging into the nomadic marauders and breaking them. Obviously this shock value is what we certainly have going for us. But it is very close, honestly, because Khan still have a good amount of strength here on the front line. The armour-piercing phalanx is a very real threat. But we're going to shut down the nomadic raiders at this point, trying to take away any sort of support Khan have. Nomadic raiders are obviously not the strongest archer, but trying to take away this is going to be very important. And now here comes the cavalry. The one problem we do have, though, is every time we recharge into this front line, we're going to take huge losses, because it's made up almost entirely at this point of halberdiers and spearmen. The Brotherhood of the Spear are still around here somewhere. There's only 8 of them, I suppose. Royal Court of House Durondor, let's follow them in. I did manage to find a section of line that was inhabited only by Nurad footmen, albeit the lances didn't come down, so it wasn't as good a charge as it could have been. But even still, really making our presence felt now with our cavalry. There goes my general. He got himself caught on the front line there with Brotherhood of the Spear and Nurad halberd, so his fate was pretty much sealed from that point onwards. The Arathirim and the Royal Court of House Durondor riding side by side, trying to go into the areas of the line where we can see the Nurad footmen sticking out, because that's going to be a much more likely target for us. If we get caught by the Storm Guard, it's all over. Numenor start to come through, but you can see that Numenor, you know, they're pretty much out on their feet at this point with regards to their infantry. All of these Khandish halberds, that was maybe a little bit overly bold, as the Arathirim of Dol Amroth charging right into the Nurad Storm Guard. Imrahil and only one of his men remain. The Bawabarim are over here, but again, if they get caught out by any of the Nurads, it's going to be all over for them. The Pharazim Swordmasters are still alive, which that's pretty much the only unit of substance Numenor have left alongside that unit of Nardukadar, so Numenor too will not be escaping this battle with much of anything left. I went for a very risky charge there with my Royal Court House Durondor, but I just figured if we can really thin the Khandish numbers out before my infantry arrive, that will really cement the battle in our favour. Royal Court House Durondor at this point, though, this is one of the problems. If you get stuck with halberds, look how quickly my Royal Court of House Durondor evaporated. And honestly, I didn't do a huge amount of damage off that charge, so while my thinking was sound, the execution was horrible. There goes the Khandish general. Pharazim Swordmasters doing their thing, the Caribarim still doing what they needed to. And I have to say, the MVP for this battle was Death Eater. The way that Numenor conducted themselves was exactly how they should have. They did very well against Umbar, and they also did a very good job at supporting Gondor as well, because it was clear that Gondor needed it, and it was clear that I only had lancers that I could really send to help them out, which wouldn't have been enough, I don't think. But with the addition of the Karibarim over there, they did very well. And then in the late game here, they've engaged Khand as well as they could with what they had left. So I would definitely give the MVP of this battle to Death Eater. I think he played Numenor very, very well. Exactly as you're supposed to play them. Aggressive and robust. The Arathurian of Dol Amroth are here. My Royal Courthouse Thorondor were really given a ruddy good seeing to by the Nurad Halberds. And this is the problem we do have. I mean, there's a lot of Halberds still here. And the Nurad Stormguard still exacting a bloody toll on us. See some more units. It's only my catapult crew, but at this point I'm just going to commit everything to try and crush Khand once and for all. As we enter into the final 1,000 frames, the Royal Courthouse Thorondor charging in recklessly once again. My catapult crew are here, trying to back up what's left of Numenor. I mean, it's clear at this point that as the good faction we're going to win, just because we still have, of course, the rest of my forces on their way over here. Guards of Osgiliath from Gondor. There goes Imrahil. Killed off. That's pretty much all Gondor has left, to be honest with you. Here come the Dunedain captains as well. Let's not forget we still have my battered and bruised Greenway unit, so even if Khand were able to fight their way out of this predicament, they would still have to deal with my militia and what was left of my crossbows in melee. But still, a very close battle nonetheless. It was definitely decided by fine margins. A few decisions, if they had been made differently, if Harad had pushed forward sooner, if Khand had pushed forward sooner on Dol Amroth, this battle could have gone very differently. If Rune had decided to be more aggressive against me, rather than play into my hands a little bit and go for an elongated fight at range. Those Nurad Halberds are routing now, so really all that remains at this point are the Nurad Stormguard. That's my Royal Courthouse Thorondor still doing their thing. Dunedain captains fighting side by side with the Pharazim Swordmasters. Guards of Osgiliath also getting in there as well, so now the Pikes are also going to get involved. The mortal foe of the Halberdier. And that's going to be the end of the Stormguard. I really like the new model for the Khandish Dunedain captains with the armour upgrade. I like the Cardinal and Tabard and the armour look. Looks very nice. Cardinal in general have been treated very nicely with regards to their aesthetics for 0.97. And there we go. Yeah. A close fight to be sure, but really I think the decisive engagement was the one over here against Umbar, and you can tell because Hazarama in the previous match, which was actually the match that we played after this one, chronologically on the day, where he played as Imladris, he did very, very well, you know, because he and Erebor worked very nicely in tandem to win their side and ultimately win their team the game. And I think that's because he may have learnt his lesson from what happened here, because he was double-teamed very effectively by Numenor and Dol Amroth, and his allies, to be fair, like I don't really blame Umbar too much for this, because he didn't have the best composition to deal with that. I feel as though he went for too many expensive units, if I had one criticism. You know, he went for a Trebuchet, Alcarondas Faithful and Warlords. I think that was too much. He needed more numbers. But also his allies didn't really do a fantastic job of helping him, to be honest with you. I think Lucky Hussar left it too long to attack Dol Amroth, because even though that wouldn't have been helping Umbar directly, it would have been making life extremely difficult for Dol Amroth. And Harad was a little bit too static early on. I feel as though if Harad had rushed down Gondor immediately, Gondor would have been in all sorts of trouble, because Numenor would not have been able to support them in the way they did, as it turned out, because when Harad did move forward, Umbar was already weak enough that Numenor could move forward, and Rune was already weak enough that I could send my cavalry to help as well. Whereas if he did that right from the off, as well as Rune pressurising myself, Gondor would have had very little in the way of support, and Harad would have won that, because Gondor had no answer to the Mumakil. The javelins would have been able to do a lot of damage. All of the armour piercing that Harad brought was very well thought out. Execution by Wilbo, though, was maybe not the best, which is a shame. I mean, he got the most kills on the field today, so you can't really argue too much with that. But by the same token, other than Khand, Gondor also had the most men on the field, which is interesting. They actually had more men deployed than I did. But yeah, I feel as though that was the difference maker. I feel as though the fact that we were able to defeat Umbar, you know, double teaming them, and the rest of their allies didn't really do much of anything. Rune played right into my hands as well, to be fair. You know, very atrocious engagement that we got involved in, which is exactly what I wanted. Gondor wasn't punished for their composition pick as much as they could have been. Khand maybe wasn't aggressive as they could have been, because that would have made life much more difficult for Dol Amroth. But, you know, it's all a case of Captain Hindsight here, really, because obviously if they started to do things differently, we also probably would have adjusted our strategy to try and meet that. The one thing we probably wouldn't have been able to account for is Harad killing Gondor quicker than they ended up doing. That, I think, would have been the answer to their problems, because then Harad and Rune could have been able to overwhelm me by attacking me from multiple angles in much the same way, and that would have been the difference makers, because it was still close, ultimately. Let's see what did the damage for myself, however. My Minhariath Sharpshooters getting 213 kills. That was the unit that was essentially allowed to mow down Innes Rim, Gamprim and Flagrim unmolested for a long period of time, so they were all good quality kills. Obviously, Cardlin's crossbows, generally speaking, are very, very effective. My Royal Court of House Thorondor also breaking 150 kills. My Tharvad Riders getting bang on 100. And my cheap archers doing exactly what they needed to do. Skirmishing with Rune for a long period of time, racking up the kills, and in particular, shutting down those E-Strong crossbowmen. Minhariath Archers, very similar story, but you can see here that a lot of my infantry didn't necessarily do the best. Either because it was committed later on, like Doom 9 Captains, who did okay, nearly 100 kills, but the rest of it, low tier, against the Easterlings was always going to struggle. It was always going to be through other means that I was going to do my damage. But yeah, I feel as though Death Eater deserves the credit for being the MVP here. Dol Amroth did their job in supporting them, although they were perhaps somewhat lucky that Khand did not decide to rush them down. Much in the same way that Gondor is perhaps lucky that Harad didn't decide to turn their anger onto them sooner. And Rune, I think, if Rune and Harad had rushed both me and Gondor, we would have been in serious trouble. But as it was, things went our way this time. So the forces of good win once again on the coast of BELFALAS. I don't know what battle will be next. I think it will probably be another big siege of some description, because I do have quite a few of those. Might be Rivendell, maybe, because I've been given a couple of Rivendell sieges already, and one of them in particular I know is quite good. So maybe Rivendell next. I don't really know. We'll see. But regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.